Amira's continued engagement with classical pieces suggests an awareness of this balance. Rather than stepping away from complexity, she remains within it. And that decision carries weight. Because staying within a demanding system requires patience. It requires accepting that growth may not always be visible. That improvement may not always be noticed immediately. That progress may be measured in small adjustments rather than major shifts. But those small adjustments accumulate. A slightly more stable tone. A slightly longer breath. A slightly more controlled phrase. Over time, these become transformation. And this is where the connection between performer and composer becomes more defined. Puccini's work does not change, but the performer's relationship to it does. At an early stage, the focus is survival, navigating the notes, maintaining control, completing the piece. At a developing stage, the focus shifts to refinement, smoothing transitions, improving consistency, deepening interpretation. At an advanced stage, the focus becomes integration, where technique, emotion, and structure operate as a single system. This progression is not automatic. It requires awareness, repetition, correction, adjustment, and most importantly, time. Because time is the one factor that cannot be accelerated. A voice matures physically. Muscles develop. Control improves. Understanding deepens. And through that process, the same piece, "Oh mio babino caro," becomes something different. Not because it has changed, but because the performer has. This is the essence of classical growth. And this is why early performances, no matter how impactful, are only the beginning. They introduce the artist. But they do not define the outcome. For Amira Willighagen, the foundation has already been established. She has demonstrated the ability to engage with complex material. She has shown stability under pressure. She has aligned herself with a tradition that demands discipline. Now the path forward is clear, but not easy. It is a path that requires consistency over time. A path where improvement is measured internally before it is recognized externally. A path where the goal is not to impress, but to align more closely with the structure of the music. And as that alignment improves, something else begins to happen. The performance changes. Not in a dramatic way, but in a precise one. The tone becomes more centered. The breath becomes more controlled. The phrasing becomes more intentional. And eventually, the effort begins to disappear. What once required concentration becomes natural. What once felt difficult becomes stable. And what once was interpreted becomes understood. This is where artistry begins to take form. Not at the moment of discovery, but in the process of refinement. And that process continues. Beyond the stage. Beyond the audience. Beyond the moment. Because in classical music, the real performance is not the one that people see. It is the one that is built, quietly, repeatedly, and with precision, over time. And as that process continues, something subtle begins to shift, not just in the voice, but in the way the performer approaches the music itself. What was once about reaching the end of the piece becomes about understanding every moment within it. Every phrase stops being a line to complete and starts becoming a decision to make. For Amira Willighagen, this stage is where instinct begins to merge with awareness. Because early performances are often driven by natural musical feeling, an intuitive sense of when to rise, when to soften, when to pause. But over time, intuition alone is no longer enough. The performer begins to ask different questions. Why is this phrase written this way? Why does the melody rise here instead of earlier? Why is this note sustained longer than expected? And each of these questions leads back to the same source, the compositional intent of Giacomo Puccini. Because nothing in "Oh mio babino caro" exists by accident, the placement of each note, the pacing of each phrase, the emotional arc of the melody, all of it reflects deliberate choices. And as the performer matures, those choices become more visible. This is where interpretation transforms. At an early stage, interpretation is often reactive. The singer feels the music and responds naturally. But at a more advanced level, interpretation becomes analytical before it becomes expressive. The performer begins to anticipate the structure. They understand where tension builds. They recognize where release is required. They control the pacing of emotion instead of being carried by it. It ensures that emotion is delivered at the right moment, in the right way, with the right intensity. Not too early. Not too late. Not too much. This is where many performances begin to separate. Two singers may perform the same aria with similar vocal ability, but the difference lies in timing. One may express emotion immediately, filling every phrase with intensity. The other may hold back, allowing the music to build gradually. And in classical music, restraint often carries more weight than immediacy. Because when emotion is delayed, it gains impact. When it is controlled, it becomes believable. And this is exactly how Puxenai designed his compositions to function. Not as continuous displays of feeling, but as structured emotional journeys. This is why O Mio Babino Caro feels so natural when performed correctly. The listener is not overwhelmed, they are guided. Gently. Deliberately. From the opening phrase to the final resolution. And as Amira continues to revisit pieces like this, that guidance becomes something she learns to control. Not perfectly, not immediately, but progressively. Now, alongside interpretation, another element begins to develop more clearly: vocal identity. In the early stages of singing, many performers sound similar. This is not a limitation, it is part of the learning process. The focus is on correctness, hitting the right notes, maintaining stability, following structure. But over time, something begins to emerge. A distinct tone. A recognizable color. A unique way of shaping phrases. This is vocal identity. And it cannot be forced. It develops naturally as technique stabilizes. For Amira, the foundation of her vocal identity lies in clarity and lightness. Her tone does not rely on heaviness or dramatic weight. Instead, it carries a natural brightness that aligns well with lyrical soprano repertoire. However, as the voice matures, this identity will continue to evolve. Because a developing voice does not remain fixed. It expands. It deepens. It gains flexibility. And with that expansion comes new possibilities, but also new responsibilities. Certain pieces that once felt accessible may become more complex as expectations increase. At the same time, new repertoire may become available as vocal capacity grows. This is where careful decision-making becomes critical. Choosing the right pieces at the right stage is not just an artistic decision, it is a technical one.